What's going on, everybody? This is Fry. So today we are doing the Brainy class tier list over here in PvZ Heroes. Let's just get right into the tier list. We haven't done one of these for the Brainy class in over 3 years, and I will be going through this quickly, but I'll be more emphasizing the cards that I've changed my opinion about over the last 3 years. So the first card, of course, is Cardboard Robot Zombie. Obviously, major trash, even in a science deck, never worth running. Chimney Sweep, I'll flip through the cards this time, since you guys are always complaining in the comment section. I keep on unclicking and clicking. Okay, Chimney Sweep is next, and this is actually an underrated card. I even started running a couple of these in, let's say, Huge Giganticus Gravestone decks, like Pirate Gravestone, since you really need another one. There aren't a whole lot of very good one-drops in the Brainy class that kind of work together with Pirates. Of course, you don't really want to ever run more than 2 of these in the deck because they are competing for the Heights lane, but if you get one of these on Heights, it's a 1-cost 3/2. It's pretty good as an aggro card, and again, it can just be used as a tempo card to sort of pad the 1 slot for a lot of decks. I'm going to give, it looks like our tier list here has a little bit of a problem. So I'm going to fix this real quick. I'm going to put this, it's either high C or low B. I'm going to put this in low B tier because I think this actually has a lot. Again, I'm always rating it, not based on how powerful the card is, but how much should you be running this in your deck. If you're making a deck with a Brainy class, is this a good idea to run? I'm going to give it a B for that because I think it's definitely worth it. Interdimensional Zombie is an interesting card. Competitively, we basically just about only run it in Conjure Leap. Playing this on turn 1, you can actually then play on turn 2. It's not a very reliable play, which is Transformation Station, which will turn into a 3-cost card and then a 4-cost card. The 3-cost cards are unreliable. It's value. You can run this in Flag Storm. This doesn't actually have a whole lot of places in the game, though, that it's super good. It'd be hard to put this in C. I'll put it in... I mean, you could just run this. You can kind of run it the same amount as you run Chimney Sweep. I'll put it, it's either, again, high C or low B. Not actually a super competitive card. Leprechaun Imp, we have actually made some successful decks using Leprechaun Imp. Again, this a long time ago, this used to have 2 pots of gold. It only has 1, but this is really, it's not a competitively viable at all. I'll put it in D tier because we found one deck where the pots of gold, it was a meme. It's not completely, absolutely freaking awful, but it's just not reliably going to give you the pots of gold. Usually this is a 1-cost 2/2 imp, and that's it. It's not really ever going to really justify using in a deck. I got Mustache Waxer, so there's a couple good mustache decks. You can check out the Professor Brainstorm Mustache deck. The original one that we made, that's pretty good. It's like aggro, and you're running it together with Grave Robber and Bungee Plumber. It's mostly just good with Brainstorm, who has, 2 Mustache superpowers, and then Grave Robber, a 1-drop, and a Bungee. I guess the one thing I'll tell you about this card is, you need, in order for this to be justified, don't just throw this together with a whole bunch of mustaches. You need a way to use that extra brain. You're playing a zombie, and then you'll have 1 extra brain. So if you don't have Bungee Plumber, or, I don't know, Rolling Stone, Nibble, something to use that, this card becomes absolutely useless. It's actually not a super useful card, and I'll put it in C tier because mustache decks, there's one mustache deck that's okay, but it's not even that great. Neutron Imp is tough. I've actually had a lot of success using this in my version of Teleport Imps, Tele-Imps. I really actually like it more than the Imposter that's in the Sneaky class. The Imposter will give you an extra imp, obviously, when it dies. The Neutron Imp can sometimes, if you're playing this together with an environment, specifically with Huge Giganticus, who has a lot of superpowers, which are environments, this ends up doing 4 damage for a 1-cost card. Ends up making it really good. You can play this with Area 22. We've had limited success doing it with that. It's mostly just going to be good with the Morticia Area 22 or Tele-Imps with Huge Giganticus and, Toxic Waste Imp. Again, not a super useful card. I'll put it in C tier. Next is Paparazzi. So we use this a lot with like Rust Bolt. You can kind of make tempo decks. We did this with Rust Bolt together with Teacher, which makes the tricks cost less. You don't want to obviously play this ever on turn 1. You play it on turn 2. It's very easy to remove. Obviously, once you're able to play, if they don't have anything that can remove a 1/1, obviously this can really scale a lot. You're playing it together with cards, especially like Healthy Treat, for a 1-cost card. It has very high potential if you're in a trick-heavy deck. I'll put it in B because it is an important part of a couple of decks, but it's not absolutely great. Teleport is S tier easy, and people always ask me what is better, teleport or teleportation zombies, so I'll put that to rest right now. Teleport is good when you need single guaranteed reliable teleports. This is more reliable because the only thing that makes you not able to teleport is BRAINY. Teleportation zombie, which is a minion and a gravestone, they can have grave removal or even the next turn. There's a bunch of cards that can remove this card, so it's not as reliable of a teleport, but obviously Teleportation Zombie, besides for having excellent stats for a 2-cost card, you can get many teleports from this. So in a deck that's running Trickster, where you need a reliable teleport, you want to run Teleport and not Teleportation Zombie. If you're running a card like Blob, which I'll get to later, which you need, again, just one single teleport blob bonus attack. That's how you win the game. You definitely want to, teleport is better for decks like that. Teleportation Zombie would be better for decks with a lot of teachers and paparazzis and little minions that you're teleporting in and cheese cutter, and very often in decks that rely heavily on teleports, you're anyway running 4 copies of teleport and 4 copies of Teleportation Zombie. So obviously it works very well with Trickster because it's also a trick that draws you a card. But yeah, the important thing in this deck is in this game is just last say is so important. It's the reason why almost any deck other with zombies, other than maybe pirates, that you are just putting a zombie on the field every single turn usually is a really unreliable way. You're usually playing a losing game because you're letting the plants react to your plays. Teleport completely flips it, that now you are able to react to what they play. You can either play a trick or teleport a zombie in a lane where it's going to make a good trade, rather than throwing a zombie on a lane and then letting them react to it and making good trades for themselves. So easy S tier for the teleport. Okay, so Beam Me Up is a decent control card. I feel like, because I'm going to give this a little bit of a lower tier probably than last time, because really right now prevalent in the game, there's just anyone who can run Black IP or Forget-Me-Nots. Forget-Me-Nots will obviously make this and then cost 3, which is really, makes it really bad. And Black IP will turn into a 3/4, which is a really terrible trade for us if you're playing Beam Me Up into a Black IP. So because actually mostly of those 2 cards, I guess, is BRAINY too, this actually becomes a lot worse. This is a very decent control card. Again, it teleports in a key chump blocker. It can make a good trade in a lane, but it's actually really lost a lot of value because, again, of all the anti-trick meta. It's not bad. It has a lot of uses as a control card. Sometimes you can play this together with signs. I'm actually going to put in just low B tier. It would be low B, high C, but I think B because it really, again, it's a very important part of, let's say, Valk Trickster Hybrid. And if you're running a couple of Beam Me Ups in any control deck, I'm not going to yell at you because it is a very good early game removal / late game chump blocker. You can, Beam Me Up. It's like an automatic teleported minion, which is really underrated. You can play this into an environment and get extra value from that if they remove your card that's in the area 22 or the Meteor Z. All right. Next, we got Cell Phone Zombie. 2 cost 1/1. The stat line is so sad, and all it does is draw a card. I mean, it's very unlikely. There are a lot better card draw options in the game than Cell Phone Zombie, and having to spend 2 brains to cycle 1 card, just take the other card that you want and put it in your deck. Why are you running Cell Phone Zombie? I'm putting this in F tier because there's almost no place for it in any deck. Got Cosmic Scientist. This is a card that a lot of people debate. I've heard a lot of people say they've had a lot of success. Every once in a while, this will give you an amazing shark that won't get removed, or a bullseye Gadget Scientist, or it'll conjure you something. But really, just looking at its stat line, 2 cost 1/2 bullseye. It's a little better than Cell Phone Zombie, but it's also giving you an unreliable card. You don't know that this Science card is going to work well with your deck. It's pretty bad. Sometimes I'll run a couple. I've really tried running this with Science and in Conjure decks with Space Time, let's say Huge Giganticus, but I've never really found the deck. Prove me wrong. Show me how good Cosmic Scientist is. But in the meantime, in terms of how much you should really be running this in your deck, I'm going to put it in D tier because it's overall just way too expensive for what it does. This being a, if this was a 1-cost card, this would be very good. I mean, it actually would have not a great stat line, but at least it's bullseye and it's conjure. I think this would really fit as a 1-cost card, maybe as a 1/1 at that point. Cryo Brain. So this is a card I've definitely gained a lot more respect for over the years. Specifically, we have a combo that we do with Huge Giganticus and Super Brains, which I call Ram Spacito. The key is to play this and to have a 4-drop that is a very highly impactful, both the play for turn 4 and for turn 5. So my favorite, of course, is Cryobrain on turn 2, and then you're able to play Pogo on turn 3, and then Mixed Up Gravedigger on turn 4. If you have that, I mean, it's almost impossible to lose the game. You're making one more brain for every single turn for the rest of the game. The super late game, Immorticia decks with Teleport Zombot, very often I'll run this and that just to make like these really late game win conditions happen earlier, and actually is a very good card in the Teleport Zombot deck. So there's a couple of decks that this is good with. I don't usually run this with Trickster. I'd rather run a control card rather than getting an extra brain for the rest of the game. I'd rather just run an extra set of control cards, an extra Bungee, beam me up, another Rocket Science instead of running Cryobrain. Throwing a couple of these into decks could be okay. I ran this in like Sun Bandits, Tryhard's deck, because again, you had a very strong play on turn 4, which was the Turquoise Skull Zombie, and then you really built every single turn after that. So not a great card, not terrible. I'm going to put it in C tier because it's really only useful in a couple of decks. I probably should put it in B, though. It really does have some very strong, very high tier uses. It's either low B or high C. It's not useful in a lot of decks. To make a point in how you really should not be running this, there's a lot of decks that people run this where it's terrible and it just bricks and it's really ill-advised. It could have been in B, but I'll put it in high C since it's actually a decent card. Probably should be in B, but sue me. Evolutionary Leap. So this is, it's sort of a meme, obviously a very fun card with our Conjure Leap deck, which is very good. But is Evolutionary Leap competitively viable? I've been trying really hard to make really competitive Leap decks. You have obviously Conjure Leap with you Giganticus. You have Professor Brain Swarm. The new version relies on leaps together with the Unlife of the Party and your small minions and your interdimensional zombies and all that. You can get a lot of value from leaps, but you basically have to leap the same card a lot of times to get reliable value. Getting a random 3 or 4 drop, there's a lot of really terrible cards in the game. But once you get to 6, 7, 8, 9 especially, there's only 2 8-cost cards, which are Plankwalker and Octozombie, and there's only 1 9-cost card, Zombot. And obviously, if you can leave something all the way to 9, you just win the game because just field clears them. Gives you a 9/9 on the field. It's hard to really rate. There's a really, really difficult card to rate competitively. I'll put it in C tier because I'd say at the end of the day, again, the mount can, for fun value, it would be an S tier, but competitively, I'll put it in C. This is Lurch for Lunch is, I think, one of the most underrated cards in the game. In Brainy decks, you can just throw in a few of these as a really cheap win condition. You obviously have to have a card with high attack in the field for this to be good. But you add this if you're running Mixed Up Gravedigger, you're running Cryo Yeti would be 2 cards in the sneaky class, but in this class, Trickster, Teleport Trickster bonus attack is really good. Blob, Valkyrie, any card really that has 4 or more attack is going to benefit a lot. It's a really good way to either, clear a minion off from your opponent's side of the field or just do a winning shot of damage. Super underrated card. I'm actually going to put this in S tier because it's hard to even justify decks that don't have a couple of these. I know you'll probably go through my YouTube and find a lot of decks that don't. I mean, should it be an A? Should it be an A? Is it not enough to be an S? If you throw 2 of these into any deck, I think it's usually a decent idea. It obviously is very circumstantial in terms of needing something to be on the field in order to get value, but which is not a given as zombies. You play zombie on the field, they can remove it. So if you don't have a way to teleport things in, I'll put it in A because it does have a flaw in terms of not being completely reliable because you need your big minion to stay on the field through the opponent's plant phase with all the removal in this game. I'll put it in A tier and that's it. We got Pool Shark, not a very good card. The Mustache doesn't very help. Sports zombies are much better when they have high health because then they can actually stay on the field and scale with your scale together with your team mascot. I have had a little bit of success running this in aggro. It's pretty high damage, actually, really high damage for a 2-cost card, but you have to teleport it. And the problem is its health. If this was a 3/2, this would be a much better card. There'd be a lot fewer things to deal with it. At 3-1, man, it's not very good. I'm gonna put it in D tier because it's not really useful in a lot of decks. Teleportation Zombie is gonna be another S tier card. I explained it before. If you want to have a lot of last say, there's a lot of really good heroes on the plant side, like Grass Knuckles and Captain Combustible, that have a really, really hard time. Grass Knuckles particularly dealing with Teleportation Zombie because they don't really deal with low attack, high health minions very well. I'll put it in S tier because it's such an important part of so many decks. Obviously, not just Science, but anything that you are teleporting in and getting last say. Swarm cards. This is really one of the best cards in the game. Transformation Station, I'll just put it right together with Evolutionary Leap. I wish I could actually rank these a little higher again because I haven't found that deck where I feel like, okay, here's a really, like competitive, I bring it to a tournament, Leap deck, but maybe we'll find it someday. Drone Engineer is a decent card, very decent stats. I've had some success doing this with like more tempo science decks. Most of the science decks, as I'll explain later, actually don't even involve Drone Engineer. They just involve Helicopter and Teleportation Zombie and Gadget Scientist. It's okay. You can run this in even a Gravestone deck, and then this becomes a 2/5. It has very high stats, can also buff other cards. Has decent combos. I'll put it in B tier. Because, especially for budget players, this is a really good card to be running, even just with Headstone Carver. It could just be a standalone card that's a 2/5 that grows with Headstone Carver. Brain Vendor is a useful card with Leaps. It's a useful card with Blob. Dex, obviously, it's going to give you 3 extra brains, which is going to make your blobs. I'll get to that in a second. Your blobs are going to be a lot bigger because they grow for every single brain you made that turn. I've also had success running this together with Mixed Up Gravedigger. It allows you to play like an entire, play Brain Vendor, play Mixed Up Gravedigger, and then you're able to, this pops out, gives you 3 more brains, and you're able to play an environment that turn. We mostly use this in Leap and Blob. Even in Blob, I'm actually going to give this a lower rating because I've actually found that Blob decks with fewer Brain Vendors is usually better because at the end of the day, this is a 3 cost. It's basically a 0 cost 2/1, which is not very impactful. You usually need your cards to do more. It's decent in a Leap, though. I'm going to actually rate it a little higher than Leap because it does have uses out of Leap decks. We'll put it in B tier. Duck Stash is a very weak statted card. Again, had a little success with Conjure, a little bit in Mustache decks, but overall, it's not a very good card. I'll put it in. It's honestly gonna, even in Mustache decks, it's not even that good because you need there to be a Mustache on the field, and then it grows, and it can be removed, and then that's a 2-for-1 for your opponent if they remove this outright. I'll put it in D tier because I mean, it probably is better than that, but I don't know. Just conjuring random mustaches as a 3 cost 3/2. I don't think it's very good. The other problem is also if this hits face and they block, it does not conjure. If it hits a minion, it does. Which is cool. Maybe someday we'll find a better uses for Duck Stash with, I don't know, space time. Electrician. Electrician is very outclassed by Lurch for Lunch. Lurch for Lunch is more reliable. Electrician, if they remove your other cards, instead of the two brains, first of all, cheaper for Lurch for Lunch, you can just make a different play. Maybe you can have another trick to play that turn if it doesn't work out. If they remove your minions, you've already committed the 3 brains. Electrician pops out, you get a 2 damage bonus attack. This can be okay in Science, playing it exactly after Drone Engineer, but usually Electrician you don't want to be running in decks. You want to just run Lurch for Lunch. Even in Science decks, I typically do not run Electrician. It's pretty expensive and not very. It's like you're already committing to do the bonus attack before you see what the plants do, which is not a good idea. It's much better to Lurch for Lunch after you see what the plants do. Then you decide, am I going to spend this card and these resources at 3 brains, man? I'll put it in C tier because I won't yell at you if you run it as a sort of a win condition. Maybe even run in a Gravestone deck. It could be useful, but it's low C. I would almost put this in high D. I'll put it in C. Funded Razor. So it's just a straight up card draw card. It's kind of cool that you usually are only playing this if your opponent passed and you don't have anything to do. You can actually gain an advantage in the game in a control deck by drawing some cards. I feel like card draw is a little bit overrated in PvZ Heroes. While in some decks being very strong, you don't really need to draw a lot of cards on a lot of decks because the win conditions happen fast. It's a very efficient game. There's a lot of very good early game strategies. You're kind of winning by turns 4 and 5, 6. You're basically setting up your victory usually. I'll run a couple of these in Zombot decks. You can run a little bit of card draw just to reliably get special cards in your deck. I'll put this in like low B tier. Because it does have some pretty good uses, and again, running 1 or 2 of them in decks, especially let's say a Trickster deck that relies very heavily on Trickster, or a Valk deck or something like that, to be able to draw your win condition cards more reliably, it's not bad. Gentleman Zombie, we're basically only going to be using this in leap decks. You play it the same as Brain Vendor. You play it on turn 3, you get 2 more brains, you leap into a 4-cost card. Kind of a gimmick. We've had a little success teleporting this card in, and then the next turn you end up with a lot of brains, and then, if you teleport this in on 4, then on turn 5, you'll actually be making 7 brains. So you can teleport in a 6-drop, or you can play Maniacal Laugh or Bad Moon Rising, but it's a bit of a gimmick. It's not a reliable card, and at 3 cost 2/2, not very impactful to justify a spot in a deck. It's probably less useful than Brain Vendor, but it has a couple of uses. I'll put it in C tier. Every once in a while, if they don't have a removal card to answer this, then this gets a lot of value over turns. But at 2 health, they're usually going to remove it like the turn after it's played. Kite Flyer is a way to draw cards. It's okay. Not really much going to be playing this in science decks. The 1 damage is proccing your opponent's block meter. It's gaining you cards, but it's really essentially giving your opponent superpowers earlier in the game, which is not very good. If this can draw 2 cards, it's worth it, but that's very unlikely. I'll put it in C tier because it's okay to run a couple of these in a Gravestone deck or in, I don't know, Science. It's not really that good. It's low C, high D again. Kite Flyer, man. You know what? I'm putting it in high D tier because I think it's actually less useful than the cards we put in C. It's more around D tier. It's just very poor stats, and it doesn't always draw a second card anyway. Nebula. Nebula is a overrated card. Obviously, you can set this up and then start making some plays where you play into it. Plays on turn 3, and then you set up, Disco Dance Floor. You played into it, so you're still at 4 brains. Then you play your Headhunter, and you're still at 2 brains. And then you play a couple more dancing cards, and that's amazing. But it's very unreliable. You can play Egg into this, but the Egg usually will just get removed. And even if it doesn't get removed, you need a very specific combination of cards in your hand to make that useful. You can play Buried Treasure into this. In any card that is evolved, the Buried Treasure will cost 1. It'll give you 2 left. But at 3 costs, and it's only giving you 2 brains, a very not useful card for real. I'm even going to put this, I'll put this in D tier because even though it has a couple of uses, it probably doesn't really have any actual competitive use, even though it's okay in a couple of decks. Moonwalker's interesting card. So it's a big dry zombie, has very good stats when played on heights, also environment. So running 1 or 2 of these in a deck, in like a tempo deck, is okay. We've had a little success in the toss deck for Immorticia, that this was a very good card. If you play this on 3, if they don't damage it, you can use Synchronized Swimmers the next turn to copy the big 4/4 stats. Again, you never want to really run more than 2 of these in a deck because it's mostly competing for the heights lane. You're not going to reliably have environments. At the end of the day, it's a big, dry zombie, and there's a lot better things usually to run on turn 3. I'll put it in C tier because it actually is a good stat card and has some uses, but not super good. Mustache Monument, we've been finding a lot of uses for. This is the best way to activate Trickster because it makes it do a bonus attack, really any big card. So Mustache Monument Trickster, Mustache Monument Valkyrie, does a 1 big shot. Obviously, Mustache Monument does not work with Blob, guys. So stop sending me decks with that combo because Blob grows after it does the bonus attack. The bottom card of a fusion always activates, the ability activates, and then the top card. So this will do the bonus attack of the Mustache Monument first, and then it will grow. So that's not a good combo. The things that we've actually discovered the last few years of Mustache Monument is teleporting this in and then playing a lot of good cards onto it. Even just, let's say, teleporting it on 4, and then playing Viking, which is an automatic 7 damage, bullseye, drain their block meter, just makes very highly impactful plays. It wins games because, again, if you have anything with high attack in your deck, it will just straight up win the game. It's like it's like an extra bonus attack. The reason that this is sometimes a lot better than, there's 2 reasons this is better than Lurch for Lunch in certain situations. First of all, it can be played immediately with a dry zombie. So let's say if you play Trickster to do a bonus attack, you're going to have to give your opponent the opportunity to remove your Trickster before you get to the trick stage of playing Lurch for Lunch. On the other hand, this you can play immediately together. This is also a card you can invest the brains earlier. You can play this on turn 3 or 4. You can even teleport it in, and then the next turn on turn 5, you play a 5-drop. As opposed to Lurch for lunch, it would have to be Viking. In order to get a reliable bonus deck, it would have to be Teleport, Viking, Lurch for lunch, which is an 8-cost card. Mustache Mine is a very solid card. It's going in A tier because it's really, really, really good in a lot of decks. I've had even a lot of success even just running this together, teleporting that in, and then playing Kitchen Sink Zombie on top of it, which will, if you place this in front, if you're doing that all, it'll chump block 5 health. It usually won't die, and then the kitchen sink will destroy the plant there, and then do 6 damage bullseye. It's just really, really useful. Next we got Regifter. Not a super good card. We run this in mill decks to fill your opponent's hands so they can't block if they have 10 cards. This could be card draw. The main flaw, of course, is when you play this dry on turn 3, your opponent is going to have 2 extra cards to respond. It has dry zombie illness. When you play this, you're actually giving your opponent their turn 3 play becomes better because they have more cards. So sometimes it's very good in specific decks where you either want your opponent to have 10 cards or when you desperately need cards. I'd say in an all-out Valkyrie deck is the only time that regifting zombie is actually competitively useful because you just really, really, really need to mulligan for your Valk. I'm going to put it actually in D tier because it's not... I think it's a card that is... It's in 99% of decks, it's actually going to be better for your opponent when you run it than when you run it. It doesn't really have a lot of competitive uses. Rocket Science is a decent removal card. Obviously, you're mostly playing this in control decks because you're passing, and if the opponent plays a big card, you remove it. If not, hopefully you have something else to do to gain value. It's pretty reliable. Most plant decks are going to have something with 4 more attack. I'm going to put it in B tier. You probably could put this in A because running a couple of these in any deck is not bad. You can even play this with tempo, if you have other tricks or other plays to do during the trick phase that costs 3, so you either Rocket Science or you do that. Honestly, I'll put it in low A tier because it actually is useful in a lot of decks. Either high B, low A. I think it actually is more competitively viable than all the cards that we have here in the B tier. So running again, you can run 2 of these in any deck and I won't yell at you because decent card. Trick or Treater, we found more uses for this over the years. You can play this. You basically never want to play this on turn 3 because it's a 3-cost 2/3. You play this on turn 4. Maybe if you're Rust Bolt, you can play a healthy treat to keep this alive. And this can very often end up being an engine of a deck to get a lot of treats. Again, what decks are treats really good? I guess if you have Paparazzi and you have Teacher and those treats are, either giving extra stats or a discount. We've had some success running this, I think, with Trickster. It's not a super useful card. It's better than I think I thought it was, so I'll put it in C tier. Sometimes the Trick or Treater can really get a lot of value from drawing a lot of cards. I'll put it in C tier. Wormhole Gatekeeper is not a bad card. First of all, its stats are incredible. It is a big dry zombie, but 3 costs 2/5 bullseye. Now, it is feeding you and your opponent cards, but I'm actually these days not even using this so much as a card draw card, which it could be okay, sort of the same as Regifter, but it has very good stats unlike Regifter. It also is a very good science card, particularly if you are have cards like Sugary Treat, like Area 22, even Drone Engineer to buff your science cards, and then you play Gadget Scientist. It ends up really getting a lot of value, particularly because of the bullseye. If you give this a little bit of extra attack, it's going to be, in an Area 22, this will do 4 bullseye, and then when you play your Gadgets, another 4 bullseye. So the bullseye is actually really the key. I'll put it in B tier because it really does have a lot of uses in science decks, and again, it could be used. It could be used as in a deck that needs to draw cards. I think we even run Gatekeeper in OTK Cat Lady because you need to draw a lot of cards. Obviously, set up your big teleport Cat Lady lunchbox combo, and this is a card we either teleport in or play into Hunting Grounds. In which case it will actually be a good... It's a high stat card, so it's justified on turn 3. Zomblob is a card that I've gained a tremendous amount of respect for over the last 3 years, particularly from the Discord community, particularly because of their deck, which is called Tele Imps. This is, you teleport in a bunch of imps, and this is actually one of the main win conditions. The cool thing about Zomblob is that you don't have to run. I feel like was the awakening of this card for me, is you don't have to run it with Nebula. You don't even really have to run Brain Vendors. I like running 1 or 2 Brain Vendors in blob decks, but they're not necessary, because really, if you're running, the main thing you need is teleports and bonus attacks, because if it's a turn 6, this is a 3 cost, just turn 6. You didn't play any Brain Vendors, no Nebulas, no anything like that. This is a 3 cost 7/5. Obviously, with the condition that you have a little card in the field. But in a deck with a lot of little cards, a flag deck or a Tele-Imps deck, something that you're going to have all those lanes, this is really, really powerful as a finisher. And it only costs 3. It's like Teleport Blob bonus attack is a turn 6 play. That's ridiculous, man. It's so... It is versatile. It is a very strong win condition in a lot of decks. You obviously need the right type of deck, because again, you need a lot of minions on the field typically in order for this to be good. Have that right lane. You need to be running then your teleports and your bonus attacks. You can even run this together, like instead of Valk Trickster hybrid, you could just go... You can go like Valk Zomblob, or you can go Trickster Zomblob, because it is that sort of big, hefty win condition that works with teleports and bonus attacks. I would almost put this in A. I'm thinking either high B or low A, because this is actually a terrific card. The amount of actual decks it becomes useful in is limited, because again, it's gotta have teleports, you gotta have a lot of minions. You really could go all out blob and it's not bad. I'm actually gonna give this the benefit of the doubt to make a point of being low A, because really, any deck with teleports, if you want to run a couple of Zomblobs as a finisher, it's fine. And then you can actually make decks that, you know, it is the really strong win condition and sort of the way the deck wins, one of the main ways the deck wins. So I'm actually going to put it, I'll put it in a low A tier. Drum Major is a completely, utterly useless card. 4 cost 4/4, which is not good stats for a 4 cost card, and no ability. It's dancing, it's sports, it's not good in dancing decks, and it's not good in sports decks. It's a piece of trash garbage. It's going in F tier. Never run Drum Major. Mad Chemist, so it's kind of like Trick or Treater, but it's more expensive, has slightly better stats. Again, it's hard to get a lot of value. There's been a couple of decks where Mad Chemist has been good. It's, again, high D, low C. I think just for fairness, I'll put it in the same class as the Trick or Treater, but you really, again, you need a very specific type of deck that plays for the late game, that it plays cheap tricks. You need some other synergy with your tricks. You need either to be Teacher or neither to be Trickster in a deck that Mad Chemist is, you know, maybe Paparazzi even, in decks that the Chemist can be good, because it's giving you unreliable tricks, and it doesn't really have very good stats for a 4-cost card. Not justified very heavily in a lot of decks. I probably should be staking both of these and putting them in D tier, but I'll keep them in C. You guys get the point. Next, we have Mountain Climber, which is basically Drum Major, but worse. It does have Bullseye, but it needs to only be played on the Heights lane, and if you have something there and it's competing for the Heights lane, it's absolute garbage and you're putting in F tier. It just does not do enough for a 4-cost card. Maybe if this was a Science card, I would actually run it, because it's Bullseye, and then you can do Gadget Scientist the next turn, but it's not a Science card. Parasol Zombie is a little bit overrated. The reason is Untrickable is actually not a very good ability. It will protect you, obviously, your guys from tricks, which it's not helping you. The Parasol is not helping you win, first of all. It's just preventing your opponents of usually a very small part of your opponent's deck for plants, which is going to be their removal. Second of all, good removal in this game is very often done, is not blocked by Untrickable, because some of the best removal cards are Cob Cannon, for example, that will obviously, this won't affect a Cob Cannon because that's not a trick, it's a plant. Even Kernel Corn, anything from Eye Spore to, obviously, again, the cards like, you know, Hammer and Squash and Shamrocket specifically, this will protect. But what are you really going to be running this together with? You're going to be playing a bunch of big Gargantuars? I don't really think that that's a very good strategy, because, again, you have another problem of where you are playing dry zombies and you're letting the plants respond to you, either with a decent trade or with just developing more damage in different lane. This card reeks of dry zombie sickness. It can be useful a couple times. If they don't have an answer to the Parasol ever, it could be useful. You know, if you have, this would probably be better with small cards that grow like together with cards like, I think in the original paparazzi deck list for Rust Bolt, This was actually used to protect your teachers and your paparazzis, and maybe even Genetic Experiment would be another card that would work well with this, just to, have smaller cards be protected, and you can just put them on the side of this and that they'll be growing kind of organically. I'll put it in, honestly, low C tier. It's higher than the D. It does have useful, it has okay stats for a 4-cost card too. Every once in a while, this is amazing. You can play this and then have a guaranteed setup like a Maniacal Laugh or an Area 22 for turns 5 or 6. So it does, again, it's useful, but it's very limited, mostly because, if this was protecting from plant abilities, like if Kernel Corn would not affect something that was untriggable, this would be a much more reliable card. But it's not very reliable because plants don't always even run removal, and very often their removal is a Briar Rose or a Cop Cannon or a Kernel Corn, and it's not going to do anything against those. Thinking Cap is only good if you have on the field and in your deck, obviously, a Professor Spacetime, which will make these 2 conjured superpowers cost 0, or a Teacher, which will make them cost 0. In those decks, they're pretty good. I do run this together with Spacetime, and mostly together with Teacher, especially in one, in my opinion, the best Rust Bowl deck, which is Tricksterazzi. We do run this and get a lot of value from Thinking Clap. Usually this is terrible because it's a 6-cost 2 superpowers, which is not worth it. Superpowers are basically 2 or 3-cost cards, depending if they're an ultimate ability or a regular one, but 6 for 2 is definitely not worth it. 4 for 2 is a very good deal. It obviously is 3 tricks for a Trickster, so that definitely takes advantage from that when you're running it together with Trickster and Teacher or Professor Spacetime. I'll put this in C tier because it's actually not an incredibly useful card, but it has a couple uses in the game. It probably should be in B. How am I putting this under Drone Engineer? Just looking at the B tier, I'm actually going to put it in B because it really is way better than most of these C's, and it's about the same as these B's. This tier list is a little bit weird. It's the Brainy tier list. I don't know if you can really compare, by the way, the B's in the Brainy class to B's in a different class. I'm really just trying to do the Brainy here. It might be a little off. Like, I think these B's, for example, are going to be a lot worse than the B's in different that I've put in different. Let's say Guardian. Let's say the Guardian class. I'm sure there's better B's than these cards. All right. Triplication is easy F. It very, very expensive, and it's giving you 3 very unreliable cards. Usually Gargs, unless it's a deck that runs Gargs, which should just be running the Garg instead of running Triplication. Usually it's absolutely terrible. And Imp, it's just not, it's not going to give you reliably good cards, and it's way too expensive for what it does. This at 3 cost, I think, would be okay. And maybe you run it with Spacetime. At 4, it's complete garbage. Copter Commando is, regrettably, I'm going to have to put this in F tier. And you're going to see in a second that Helicopter, the card that costs 1 more and teleports the helicopter in, is going to be a very high tier. Unfortunately, Copter Commando, though, if when you play it, it just doesn't do enough for a big dry zombie. It is science, it is imp, science more importantly, but again, it's a big dry zombie. It's so extremely outclassed by, this is, Helicopter is basically Copter Commando with a built-in free teleport built into the card. They're able to play this in the trick phase. You never really want to run Copter Commando in a deck. Gadget Scientist, here we go. And this is one of the cards for the last few years. We've really figured out finally how to use Gadget Scientist. The best hero is Immorticia because Immorticia has Area 22. And that will, any card that's put into it will get extra 2/2 and Frenzy. But we've even had a lot of success with this with Brainstorm because you have cards like Sugary Tree. The way you want to play Gadget Scientist is not with Drone Engineer and playing really heavy tempo and using Gadget Scientist as a finisher. That is okay, but the main way you want to do it is by playing patiently. You want to play your bullseye cards like Teleportation Zombie and then be controlling the opponent and set up a very big 1-turn kill with your Gadget Scientist. My favorite combo is going to be Helicopter on turn 6, Gadget, then, this can be played dry, and then Gadget Scientist on turn 7. That's just from the Helicopter's 12 damage, which is most of your opponent's health. If you include the Gadget Scientist, that makes it 14. If you have anything else on the field, or the Helicopter is in an Area 22, or a Meteor Z, or has any other buffs on it, the Helicopter is then going to really absolutely demolish your opponent. So I'll get to Helicopter in a second, but I really think that we've had a lot, again, look up, just fry 'em up Gadget Scientist or Science decks. on Frame Up Gaming, and you'll see the extreme success we've had with Gadget Scientist. It's better than all these Bs, and it's literally just because of how bad the Bs are in this particular tier list that I'm gonna put it in A, because it's a really strong finisher in a pretty good deck. I almost kind of wish I had developed these, because who even knows if I would have ran these in the tournament. It's really a really underrated card. Don't use Gadget Scientist together with Mime. Okay, we had one deck where we actually used Mime together with Gadget Scientist. It's very hard to pull off because it's too many cards. You need to teleport in your Mime Guard, and then you need not only Gadget Scientist, but you need a lot of cheap science cards. And you basically like 2 cheap science cards to do the big bonus attacks. The main use of Mime Guard is going to be together with Trickster. You control with your tricks, you teleport in your Mime on turn 6, and then you play Mustache Monument Trickster on turn 7. The Mustache Monument will make the Trickster do 12 damage. It's doing 2 bonus attacks, which makes the Mime Guard, besides for the 5 damage it did the turn before when you teleported in, this will do 2 more bonus attacks, because again, it copies bonus attacks. This also really messes up cards like Bananasaurus Rex or even Plant Food. There's a lot of opportunities for Mime Guard to counter the opponent's bonus attacks for the Mega Grow class, but it's kind of just useful in one deck. We've tried using this together with, it was actually not bad with like Teleport Mime on 6, and then Mustache Monument Bounty Hunter, which is a frenzy card. So that's not only doing a bonus attack, but if it's killing something, it'll do a frenzied attack. You don't want to be playing this together with just going viral, because it's really hard to make your cards do going viral bonus attacks, and the Gargantuar Mime is living for multiple turns by the time you can set that up. I'll put it in the same as these Bs, because it does have a pretty strong use, but it's not incredibly useful. Pirates Booty. We had one deck where we really tried to get a lot of value out of Pirates Booty, but all practical purposes, this is an easy F tier card, because for 5 cost, not only is it really expensive for a card draw card, but it is not reliably even going to draw you more than that. This on average draws 1 card, because you have to, even if you have 2 zombies on the field that live until the attack phase, and then you're spending 5 to draw 2 cards. So for this to be worth it, you need to have 3 zombies on the field, which is just so unreliable. It's such a bad card, man. Portal Technician, if I'm being honest, I love trying to fit this into decks with Valkyrie, but honestly, if I'm being really honest, it's like low D, high F tier, because it's not a good card. It's kind of cool how it's sticky in the field. I guess it's better than these F tier cards, so I'll just put it in a low D, but for a 5 cost 4/4, the problem is there's nothing forcing your opponent to remove this. Maybe I'll end up trying a deck where I'm sticking this into an environment that gives it higher attack, or I'll buff this card. But end of the day, in order to make your opponent remove it, and then who knows what you'll get. You're usually just getting a 1 or 2 cost anyway, because if you notice, there's a lot more cards that cost 1, 2, and maybe 3 than that cost expensive. Not a very good card. Viking is a card we've had a lot more uses out of. I explained the combos before. You can teleport in Viking. You can also play Mustache Monument, teleport in a Mustache Monument, and then play Viking on top of that. It's really so much damage. I mean, it's close to half your opponent's health, and then they have no block meter too. So you can definitely use this as a finisher in decks, particularly with Mustache Monument. It's not super useful. You don't want to usually be playing Viking dry. There's another deck we also had success with Vikings, the fact it's a pirate. So we ran Huge Giganticus, we ran Headstone Carver, Pirates, Pogo, Mug, and then on turn 6, you're playing in Teleport Viking. And if you have a Flame Face on the field, which makes all your pirates have Strike Through, all of a sudden this is a 5 cost, 7/5 Bullseye Strike Through, which is devastating, and a really good win condition in that deck. I'll put it in B tier because it has a couple actually good uses, and it's one of the few just dry zombies on turn 5 that's actually good to run on a deck. Helicopter is the card I've completely overhauled and changed my mind about in the last 3 years. Explained definitely before that in science decks particularly, you want to play this on turn 6. It has a built-in teleport. It's a really strong card at 6/5. And the fact, again, you don't need an extra card in your hand to teleport or a teleportation zombie to activate this. Particularly play this in the Area 22. But even without that, it's like automatic 12 damage to your opponent's face if you have the Gadget Scientist. So you definitely want to run it together with that. It's good, man. I'm going to put it in A tier to make a point, because I think these decks are actually really strong. If you haven't tried the new Fathomed, maybe I'll put it in B, because it's only one type of deck that it's really good. I wonder if there's even other decks for Helicopter, though. All right, I'll put it in B because Gadget Scientist really does have other uses out of Helicopter. Helicopter is really only useful with the Gadget Scientist. The Gadget Scientist is more useful. I'll put it high B tier, though. If you haven't tried out the newfangled, the ones I've just been doing, like I think last year in 2022, the Helicopter Gadget Scientist decks, check them out, because if you don't know what I'm talking about right now, don't judge me until you watch those videos of the Helicopter decks. So just look up Frame Up Gaming Helicopter and you will see what I'm talking about. With Area 22 and with other buff cards and with Gadget Scientist, this card is a freaking beast. Kitchen Sink Zombie, we've had a little success using this in some decks. It's just a big stat card. I know it looks really fancy with all of its abilities, but at the end of the day, it's really just a big dry zombie that has bullseye and is basically completely outclassed by Shield Crusher, which is cheaper and basically does the same amount of damage and has a much better ability. This does have Frenzy is the only advantage, so if they have small zombies in the field, putting this on a Mustache Monument will end up clearing, a whole lane as well. It's kind of cool that if there's a minion in front of this, it doesn't die to Shamrocket, so it has that going for it too. 3 health is actually, there's a lot fewer hammers in the game and choppers than there are. Well, chopper wouldn't matter, but because there's a plant there already, but there's a lot fewer hammers in the game than there are Shamrockets. Overall, I'll put it in C tier because it has some uses, but not super useful. Wizard Garg is not a good card. We've really tried very hard to make Garg synergy decks, but at the end of the day, it's just a worse Kitchen Sink. It's just a worse Viking. It's so expensive at 6 cost, and it's very hard to get another Garg to hit face and be bullseye while you have Gargs on the field, because they're just so, got Wizard Garg on the field, because Gargs are just so expensive. I'll put it in D tier. Bad Moon Rising, so you could use this as a win condition. It's not super reliable, but really there are a lot of decks that benefit a lot from Bad Moon Rising. It's also a very fun card. I'll put it in C tier because, well, it's either like low B or high C. I think because this actually could be justified in a lot of decks that run Swarm or run Imps, that, or even you can build an entire deck for Bad Moon Rising to be the win condition. Is it the best win condition in the world? No. Is throwing a couple of these into a deck that has other win conditions a good idea? Every once in a while, this. I'll put it in B. I'm also giving it a little bit extra bias because it is a very, very fun card. So if you're playing this game not just to win, but to have fun, it's one of the most fun decks. I really should be doing more Bad Moon Rising decks because I haven't been doing a whole lot of them this past year, and I really want to bring it back. Mechasaur. Mechasaur is an underrated card, actually. This is a card that, when played, you take over the freaking game. You obviously want to teleport it in with Teleport or Teleportation Zombie. Because if you play this dry, they will Shamrock it before it's able to do anything. But if you teleport this in, I mean, for a card that is this impactful, it actually is pretty cheap. Besides for having good stats because of the bullseye, it's every time you draw a card, so you teleport this in, it's a 6/7, and then you automatically draw a card at the beginning of your turn, so it's making a guy. If it's hitting the water lane, it's always going to be making a Mondo Bronto, which is a very strong card. The history class in general is a very strong set and has a very high average cost. So this is usually making a lot of Undying Pharaohs and Raw Zombies, and there's just a lot of really strong history cards. History zombies. You gotta teleport it in. So you're playing more like a control deck. It's highly impactful, man. Hard to know where to really rate this card. Ah, man. But, even in the Morticia decks, instead of running Zombot, you go for Teleport. Mechasaur is arguably better because it's 2 turns earlier. I'll put it in a low B tier, but I have found Mechasaur to, again, if you play it dry and they answer, it's terrible. But if you teleport it in or they can answer this card after a couple turns, if they don't answer this card, the game ends in a turn or two, like so easily. Really, really highly impactful. And of course, we will finish off the tier list with Trickster, which I will remain putting this in S tier. Really, really, really strong card. So obviously, Tricksters are only useful in Trickster decks, but Trickster decks are still really good. There's obviously is a meta that has a lot of anti-trick. There's a lot of Forget-Me-Nuts and a lot of black IPs, but even against those decks, if you build your deck correctly, you can have a pretty good matchup. And then decks that don't run those cards, and Brainana, I would say, is the third killer for Trickster. This will have a really good matchup in any deck that doesn't really run those. It's very good with control cards. This will very often go down to 4, 3, 2, 1 cost. So this is usually in the right type of deck, built with the right tricks and the right amount of control and stalling. It's a really strong, one of the best win conditions in the game. I don't do a ton of Trickster decks. I feel like I've done a ton, but we've done Trickster Mime, we've done Valk Trickster Hybrid, we've done just Trickster with mixed up Gravedigger. It's just such a versatile card. You can do it with Immortician, and you have it with Area 22. Probably the best Teleport Zombot deck is the one with Zombot and Trickster in it, because you have 2 late game win conditions in a very trick heavy deck. And it's just a reliable way of winning the game, of doing 20 damage to your opponent's face. You play this with Mustache Monument, you play with Teleport and bonus attack, you're doing 12, 18 damage. I mean, literally just the win condition. It's almost like the purest, just pure win condition card, finishing off your opponent in this game. Anyway, guys, that was the Brainy tier list. If you have any major problems with any of the cards I put in this, keep it to yourself. No, let me know in the comment section below. If you're a little bit, please just watch the video though. Don't skip to the end. If you're skipping to the end and you're like, hey Fry, how come you put I don't know, how come you put Blob so high? How come Lurch for lunch is not a very good card? Let's first of all go back and listen to my explanation of why I put something somewhere, and go watch one video of me playing this card in a deck. And then you'll kind of see I've been alluding a lot to most of the cards, which decks I find that they're the most useful in. So watch those videos before you start coming in. Oh my god, how come 3 nuts not an S tier? You know what I'm saying, guys. Anyway, that was the Brainy tier list. Hope you guys enjoyed. I'll see you in the next one. Peace. This is Fry.